Wife of 7 years cheated on me, so I got revenge by doing something messed up. So to begin, my wife and I have been happily married for 7 years, and we have had an incredible marriage. After a lot of experimentation with many individuals, I had finally found the one. We seldom argued since we were both obsessed with the same things: anime, otaku culture, fitness, and so on. Even after this long, we would 2-4 times a week, and she would hardly ever stop my advances. Even though she had a job, she would always for me, and I was over heels in love with this ideal woman. We had no children, but we planned to have them when the time was perfect and our finances increased to a level that we were both comfortable with, but that is now impossible for her. So it all began 8 months ago, when I saw my wife was always addicted to her iPhone. That struck me as odd, so I joked, "Why are you on the phone so much? You cheating on me?" And, believe it or not, my wife's face went pale the moment I said that. I remember having a nasty sensation in the pit of my stomach as soon as I saw that face, but then my wife replied, "Don't be stupid, and simply walked up to me and kissed me. We had after that, but I was still thinking about it, even after we were done. Now, being the naive, stupid little fool that I am, I didn't question her anymore that day, making excuses like, "Oh, it's weird to ask to peek at her phone," or "I should trust her more." So I simply disregarded it and went to bed with her. The next week, I noticed my wife was arriving home later than normal, and when I confronted her about it, she told me it was because of work, and they had some new projects at work. When I questioned her about the new initiatives, she was cryptic and claimed she was too exhausted to discuss work at home. I became more suspicious and determined to intrude on her private for the first time. When I requested to use her phone, she perked up and asked, "What for?" I said that all I wanted to do was look things up. I kid you not, she announced she needed to use the restroom and rushed out, locking the door behind her. Keep in mind that we were quite open and never locked the bathroom door or even closed the door while we were taking a. Yes, we were that couple. This was a first for me. It stunned me so much that I simply stood there frozen in place as it dawned on me that she was cheating on me. But a little part of me hoped that wasn't true. After all, I hadn't seen any evidence yet, and she's probably just weary. She emerged from the restroom about an hour later and handed me her phone. She said I could use it and apologized for locking the bathroom since it was a large and she didn't want it to stink too much, which was strange because we never gave it before. I searched through and didn't find any messages, but I still had a strange feeling about it. I borrowed my wife's phone the following night while she was asleep to find out how to restore deleted messages. I went on to her iCloud. She has the same password for everything, and discovered a long list of deleted texts. My heart crushed instantly and my legs felt limp. There were illegal texts going back to that day, 6 months ago, and they contained the complete package, nudes being exchanged, and a whole load of FGED that I don't even want to think about. Worst of all, I knew the person she was dating. It was her coworker's employer. I wasn't close to him, but I knew how he looked and that he was married. At first, I felt like sobbing, but soon I felt so enraged that I wanted to crush the phone on the ground. I created a backup and saved all of the text conversations and attachments for evidence, which I'd emailed to myself. I placed the phone back in my pocket, got in my vehicle, and went to the next vacant parking lot where I wept my heart out. I was so shattered that I simply wanted to kill myself, but then I saw my wife's face and saw how joyful she looked, and I felt total hatred and wrath against her. I was going to annihilate her. After receiving frantic calls from my wife, I arrived home, and she questioned me in a frenzy about where I had gone and what was going on. I'm not sure how I accomplished it, but I simply smiled and lied about testing the automobile. She purchased it, we had breakfast, and then I departed, phoned in sick, and asked for a leave of absence. I had a great employer, and I basically simply informed him what was going on, and he said okay and offered me 2 weeks of vacation time, which I was glad for since I would be paid, even though a leave of absence without pay would have been good as well. I contacted a lawyer and asked and scheduled a meeting, then afterwards went out and purchased electronic cameras to place in my home. I returned home. I waited, and my wife ultimately arrived home earlier than normal. When she saw me, she began bothering me about what occurred this morning more than usual, but I simply kept telling her it was nothing. We ate and my wife was initiating that day, but I was so disgusted that I didn't even want to look at her, so I simply told her I was sleepy. She continued asking what was wrong and tried again, but I just kept replying later, and we both ultimately went to bed. I logged into my bank account the following day. I wasn't concerned about money, since the home was solely in my name and I had gotten the mortgage before my marriage. My wife and I had a joint account, so I contacted my bank and created a single checking account, then transferred all of the money in that account into my new single checking account in real time. In terms of credit cards and lines of credit, we had previously paid off everything, but I canceled all of the joint credit cards we had, as well as one LOC we had for $50,000 that I doubt we would be accepted for again, but I didn't give a FK. Everything that was joined was now closed except for the joint checking, which now had zero, and I removed the overdraft protection of $3K from that as well, so anything below zero would bounce back. After a few days, I'd completed all of the paperwork from the lawyer, all of the evidence I provided him, and I've installed house cameras in my home just in case. After a week, I tracked up her boss's wife on Facebook and messaged her. After I told her everything and provided her the documentation, she stated she wanted to meet up. Okay, I said. The following day, I caught up with the ladies, and she was a complete shambles. We spoke, and she sobbed many times, which I soothed. She was a middle-aged lady in her 40s, and they had a 12-year-old daughter. She informed me that she would be filing for divorce, thanked me warmly, and expressed her want to keep in contact. We swapped contacts, and for the first time, I felt relieved that I wasn't in this alone. I finally made it home, and my wife arrived early today, which was a pleasant surprise. She begins to pace uncomfortably towards me. My name is Everything Okay. I'm quite silent and ignoring her at this point, just sitting down on a chair and staring at her. She begins to panic and continues to inquire as to what is happening. So I simply threw it at her. Why did you cheat on me? I recalled her freezing and then denying it, asking if anything was wrong and what the heck I was talking about. I had printed out all of the text communications between her and her supervisor and just tossed the papers at her. She quickly burst into tears and apologized for making a mistake. It was funny because a part of me wanted to forgive her when I saw her, a greater part of me wanted to get this divorce over with, and an even bigger part of me wanted to use her and break her. When I told her I wanted a divorce, she shouted, freaked out, and began sobbing uncontrollably. She actually dropped down on her knees and begged me to forgive her with tears in her eyes. She said that she would do anything and that it was a mistake that would never happen again. I'm not sure what occurred when. She said that, but I smacked her across the face, and I mean hard slap where you could feel it from a long distance away. My wife instantly stopped talking, but she simply kept weeping and muttering sorry, sorry, sorry. I'm not sure what happened to me. I'm not a violent guy, and I've never laid a hand on my wife or anybody else in my life, but the next thing I did was even more messed up. I unbuttoned my zipper and pulled it out, telling her to suck it. She simply gazed at me for a second, then I shouted at her, and she began blowing away. I remember gagging her hard because I just wanted to punish her and didn't care about the pleasure. Eventually, I shouted at her to take her trousers down, which she did, and I just FK'd her raw and came inside her. I'm not sure what happened that day, but I snapped and FK'd her into oblivion, constantly coming into her raw. But as I saw her become injured, I became more delighted. She was screaming and asking me to stop, but I continued to read the passages whenever she did, and she stopped moaning. We both soon fell asleep on the bed. I woke up the following day, and I'm not sure why, but I felt so much more energized and content with myself. My wife wasn't in bed, so I went to the kitchen and found her seated at the table. She was a shambles, her eyes swollen, and she looked like a piece of junk. I purposely laughed at her, but on the inside I was in a lot of pain, and a part of me felt awful. She continued saying she was sorry, that it was all a mistake, that she wouldn't do it again, and other such nonsense. I was still nude, so I walked up to her and performed the same thing I did the day before. But this time, I didn't even ask. I simply pulled and grasped her hair firmly and did the job. I hurrah all morning until I was satiated, then prepared breakfast. A plan was forming in my brain, and the more I thought about it, the more jumbled my thoughts became. I went to her and told her she didn't have to go to work. She said yes right away and said she'd take a few days off. For a time, I verbally assaulted her. My wife was stunned, but she immediately began weeping and hurried to the phone, dialing her employer. After that, I did all sorts of messed up things to her. I instructed her to lick my toes, then my balls, and finally but she hesitated. Then I reminded her of her affair and told her that her employer must have been thrilled fkin you, and she quickly obeyed. The whole day went like this, and I kept coming within her raw. The following day and the day after that, the same thing occurred. Throughout these days, my wife continued apologizing while I threatened to divorce her, and she would weep and BS about how sorry she was. My wife received a phone call from her workplace one day, informing her that she had been sacked. Apparently, the AP wife had told her husband's company about my wife and his connections since it was against policy, and there was some other things involved as well, but I was too busy trying to laugh at her when I saw my wife's expression was depressed. Her cries became more intense, but I persisted in telling her that I would still divorce her until she performed what I requested of her. She said that she was willing to do anything, practically anything. I told her I wanted to have a child. When she heard this, she sprang into tears, stating she would love to give birth to my children, that she had always wanted to be a mother, and that she would wait until I was comfortable. Perfect, I said. We continued having. Before my drive, I was probably slightly over average, but now I was eager any time I saw her. I liked the control I had over her, as well as the suffering I was inflicting her or when she was in pain. After about 2 weeks, my wife very much followed all of my directions. I warned her about the cameras in the home and that if she went out for an extended period of time, I would leave her. She was insistent about staying indoors. I had advised her not to hunt for a new career, that my position was sufficient, and that she should just prepare to be a mother. She was overjoyed to hear this. So this continued, and she didn't leave the home much, except it was for groceries, which we did jointly, and we couldn't go out much because of COVID. My wife was ecstatic when she found out she was pregnant. I invited her to come into the living room, and we both sat down. She grew a bit concerned, but she claimed she was extremely thrilled about the kid and would try her best to raise it. She had always desired to become a mother. I pulled out the divorce papers and placed them on the table. As soon as she spotted them, she stopped for a few seconds before weeping and begging why she was pregnant. "Please, let's remain together, I love you," and all kinds of nonsense. I said that I wanted to divorce. Now she bursts into tears and continues to wail. I told her there was something she could do if she didn't want me to divorce her. After weeks of this is where my screwed up thoughts led. She simply stared at me and said she would do anything and begged me not to divorce her. I advised her to terminate the pregnancy. When I stated this, my wife became enraged and told me how ironic it was that I could be so callous. She screamed at me and claimed it was the one thing she would not do. So I took out my phone and found a group chat I'd set up with all of our close family friends and social circle members, including her mother. My wife's mother was very religious, almost a devout Catholic. If she discovered her daughter had cheated, it would be disastrous for their relationship, since they were close as her only daughter and kid. I promised her I'd publish all the shady details of your affairs to this group so everyone could see what a jerk you are. My wife started to weep and begged me not to do this, that it was wrong. I told her she had to make a decision and put a lot of pressure on her after telling her what all her close friends and her mother thought of her. She consented to have the baby terminated, and I scheduled an abortion appointment. My wife stopped sobbing soon after, and she just looked disoriented and empty. We had the surgery, and she sobbed both before and after, telling me how she was a bad woman, how she felt like a failure, and how she wanted to die. A part of me felt terrible, humiliated, but a greater part of me was happy and excited that she got what she deserved. But I wasn't through yet. One day, I did the same thing I had done before. I threatened her with divorce and the loss of her social life. She began weeping again, but this time she attempted to listen to me. She was correct. I wanted her to perform a vasectomy. She yelled at me, saying she would never do that she really wanted to be a mother, and that I had already wrecked that for her. However, I persisted in scaring her until she relented and consented. We went to see a urologist, and I practically had to pull her into the room to make sure she did it. It was a success, but she couldn't give birth and wept for so long that she couldn't. We couldn't later since it would take too long for her to recuperate. So we had to wait 2 weeks. My wife was now very sad and had no life in her eyes after that moment. Even when I penetrated her, she merely grumbled and didn't respond, even while I was choking or injuring her. So I wanted to spice things up. At this time, my wife was very obedient to me, and she would agree to anything I said about. So I phoned a tattoo artist I'd paid more than usual to get some tattoos done on her. I blindfolded my wife and instructed her to lie down, and I paid this tattoo artist extra to do so. We began with her, and I scribbled my name directly above it. I scrawled things like this in a few other places before we got to her forehead. When she realized, she panicked out and attempted to stop it, but I assured her that everything was all right. But she started yelling and panicking out, and the tattoo artist ultimately freaked out as well. So I simply said it. After that, he departed. After that, we had. Things were going well for me. My wife was remaining at home, and she didn't leave her room much unless it was for food. Otherwise, she remained in bed while I wasn't there. I'm guessing it's because she's depressed. I'm not going to take her to treatment, but I will monitor her health. So, after a few months, something occurred one day. I was on my way home when I received a call from the hospital saying that my wife had tried suicide and that I needed to get there as soon as possible. I informed my employer and then headed to the hospital. I discovered my wife in the room, who looked like, and I also saw my neighbors. They said she had overdosed on Advil, but nothing catastrophic had happened. According to the neighbors, she came to their home and screamed that she was a rotten woman, a bad mother, and that she deserved to die. I apologized to them, telling them she wasn't mentally stable at the time and that this would never happen again. I brought her home once the doctor released her. When we arrived home, I immediately shouted at her and hurled abuses at her. She merely stood there and collapsed to the floor. I grabbed her, but she immediately deflated back to the floor, like she was dead or something. It seemed strange. I simply grabbed her up and flung her into the bedroom, prepared her some food, which she ate, and spent the day nursing her. She eventually came out of her depression, and I resumed the rigorous routine, but she's terribly sad these days, and she often expresses her want to die. To be honest, I'm not sure whether I'm going to divorce her. I enjoy where things are right now, but it's nice to know that I have the choice.